Hi everyone, Bear from Bear Reads Books. Welcome back to my channel. It's time for Friday Reads. Who would have thought? Me doing Friday Reads. And it's actually Friday. And I think I might actually publish this on a Friday. So, there's plenty of stuff going on. You haven't heard from me for a little bit because I had finally a family vacation. It was something I booked at the end of last year. And then it was just a cross fingers kind of thing to make sure that COVID didn't take it away from us. So we finally got there. We took a plane ride for the first time in a very long time. And in the middle of winter in Australia, we spent time in tropical North Queensland on the Great Barrier Reef, snorkeling, swimming, doing cruises. It was wonderful. It was amazing. 28 perfect weather every single day, and just a summer holiday in the middle of winter. It was gorgeous. Anyway, back nice and refreshed, and read tons of books while on holidays. And I'll give you that list real quickly. I'm not going to do a little review, but because it's been a couple of weeks, my Friday Reads today is really just about what have I read since you last heard from me, with a little synopsis. Let me grab my read list. So I took quite a few books away with me. What I had on my list was stuff from the library that needed to go back. I had stuff that I'd started that I needed to finish. And I had stuff from NetGalley that needed to be finished and a review written. So it's quite a few things going on that I needed to really get cracking on. So holiday came at exactly the right time. So just before leaving, I finished From Where I Fell by Susan Johnson. Susan Johnson is an Australian author, and in this particular book, and I've read her before. I think I first read her books back in the 90s, and then maybe one more recent one, and then into Where I Fell. From Where I Fell. And this tells the story of two women that cross paths unexpectedly. So the main character, the one based in Australia, Pamela, is trying to contact her ex-husband, who's French. And he had an email that kept bouncing back, and he said he had a new Gmail account, so all she did was put the prefix from the old email on a Gmail and sent it, and instead of going to her ex-husband, it goes to someone with the same name based in the United States, also with a female name of Chris. So she ends up communicating with this person by email, someone of a similar age, a little bit older than herself, going through not similar things but family stuff and all sorts of things. And in their emails they discuss all of their family issues and all the problems they've been having. And along the way they have little fallouts but they really come to like and respect and love each other over the course of about 14, 16 months is their communication. And there is a big finale, and I won't give that away, but at times I found the structure of it. The structure of it is entirely the email chain. So me sending you an email, you replying, and then the topics change. And that's the entire book, is email after email after email. There's no contextual stuff outside of the email. So it is quite a different way to approach a book. It's just two old girls emailing each other about what's happening in their lives. And I must say that over time, like emails in general, it got a little bit tedious. It wasn't always exciting. It wasn't always moving the story arc forward, and it did sometimes get bogged down. So it wasn't a perfect thing, but I applaud Susan Johnson for trying something very different, and it was reasonably successful. If that sounds interesting to you, I had a great time reading it. It's got a cracking good ending, and it does build its excitement over time, but I never got to the point of really enjoying these two characters. They're both good people, they're both going through stuff, they've both got interesting things to say, but because of the email communication thing, I never really felt like enamored with them or connected with them in any strong sense. I don't know, I'd really like your opinions if you felt differently. It was still a good read. I think I gave it 4, but it was, I had my issues with it. So that was Susan Johnson, From Where I Fell. That was just before I left on the plane, like just after I spoke to you. And I took quite a few books away with me. I took The Newcomer by Laura Elizabeth Willett, which I did a review about, and it's very, very good. I took a book of essays by an Australian woman called Maria Tumarkin, called Axiomatic. And I'm not going to say too much about these. I'll put pictures up here as well. And I've read a lot of essay collections recently, I realise, and I've told you about a few of them. There's been a few others that I haven't even mentioned, but I'm finding them incredibly good. There was one about our eating habits that I read, and there was this one, Axiomatic, and I've got another one on my list that's ready to go very soon. But all very, very good. Anyway, I also read Jasper Jones by Craig Silvey, and I've seen that reviewed on YouTube before. A little bit polarising. Some people find it... some people don't get the Australianness of it, and it is, Craig Silvey writes in a very Australian type of vernacular, and it is set in the 80s. No, it's set in the 1960s, so in the early 1960s. So some of the language is, you could consider racist and homophobic. Like, there is that language there, and remember, they're kids. I'm not making excuses for homophobic and racist language, but these are children talking to each other, and as such they experiment with language, they experiment with what they know and don't know, and they learn along the way. And I think the characters using language like that is not indicative of racist attitudes or homophobic attitudes of the author. It's really trying to put these children's lives in the context of the world in which they lived, and unfortunately in 1960s Australia, that was a very homophobic and very racist society. I think we've grown a little bit, I hope, but that, I think, was jarring for some readers as well, reading in a modern context about the 1960s, where these things are part of everyday life and this language is part of everyday life. But I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I read it because my daughter had to read it. It's a set school text here in Australia, so you get to year 10. So, what's that, sophomore year of high school? And you read it. And she thoroughly enjoyed it. She thought it was a little confronting, a little strange. I found it confronting too. The themes in there are quite adult-type themes. But I really thoroughly enjoyed the book. That's Craig Silvey's Jasper Jones. It tells a story, and I'll do it very briefly. It tells a story of a young man wakes up in the middle of the night with a tapping on his window, and there is a young Aboriginal man called Jasper Jones that everyone in town knows. And Jasper wants this young boy's help to solve a crime, because the place where he stays in the bush, there is a body. And he takes this young boy from his bedroom, or asks this young boy to come with him, and they go into the bush and they find this body hanging from a tree. And it's what they decide to do, because Jasper, the Aboriginal boy, decides that if anyone was to find out that this body was here, then Jasper would be blamed, even though he tells his friend he didn't do this. He absolutely didn't do this. But he said, if anyone finds out, I'm the one that will be blamed. I'm the one that will be hanging from a tree. So they decide, in a fit of panic, to do something with the body. And the story continues from there. It's a really nice premise. It's a great dark premise, especially for a YA fiction, about two boys that decide to hide a body to protect themselves and to protect their friend. I did thoroughly enjoy it, but it has its confronting language, it has its confronting themes, and you need to be aware of that going in. That is Craig Silvey's Jasper Jones. Also on my list, I have finished brand new from John Boyne of Boy in the Striped Pyjamas fame. Also a YA. This is not YA, this is The Echo Chamber, his brand new book. And this is dark, satirical comedy. And on Goodreads I wrote on my review that it's a satirical, farcical romp. And if you could picture what that means in a modern context, you have this man called George Cleverly and his family of Cleverleys, which is a very clever name to give a bunch of idiots like these people. and they're all addicted to social media. They're all not famous, but they're all fringe famous in their own way. One's on television, one's an author, and the children are just spoiled brats who are addicted to social media. And if you weren't convinced of the evils of social media before reading this book, and you can tell that the title, The Echo Chamber, is what social media does. It creates an echo chamber where your own thoughts and attitudes get funneled back to you to reinforce what you already believe. It doesn't expand upon your thoughts and belief systems. It just reconfirms what I already believe to be true. So if you weren't convinced that social media was evil, you certainly will be. And in this satirical, farcical romp, we see each of these four people of the Cleverly family convinced that everything they do is right and just and for the best. But they're all completely wrong and all completely idiotic in everything they choose to do. And their lives are all a shambles. However, they all believe that their lives are perfect, that they live beautiful lives. But they're not. They live beautiful lives because they've constructed this beautiful life around them. But in essence, their lives are an absolute mess. And they've made so many wrong decisions. And it's this, the whole book takes you on this journey of the entire family unit, first individually and then as a unit, completely falling apart in all of its comedic glory. And I had no idea that John Boyne could write comedically and satirically like he has here. And it's thoroughly engaging. At the beginning there was so much going on and it was so ridiculous. And I thought, I don't think this is for me. I think I'm going to put it down. But I kept going. And as soon as I realised what it was, in that it was satire and farce, that then I just thoroughly enjoyed it. And there's some laugh out loud moments and there's some shocking moments, gasping moments. And you really just need to just go for the ride. It's great. The Echo Chamber by John Boyne. Finished that one on holidays. It was a great ripping yarn. Also finished, I've just finished this morning, is Detransition Baby by Torrey. Wow, this was another one that at the beginning, I thought, right at the beginning, I thought, maybe this isn't for me. And I stuck with it. And I thoroughly fell in love with all of these characters. And I'll explain the book for you now. It tells the story of a man called Ames who was a trans woman and he has since detransitioned. He's having an affair with his boss at work, a Asian middle-aged woman going through a divorce, and she falls pregnant. And the decision is, do they keep the baby? Do they continue on? Do they have the baby? Do they form a family? And Ames doesn't actually feel like a man. Since he detransitioned, he still feels at his core to be trans. And he doesn't fit nicely into whatever box he's currently living in. He didn't feel right about being a trans woman, so he detransitioned. He doesn't feel right about being a man. His girlfriend doesn't know this history, and if he's going to have a baby with her, he decides to tell her, and he does, and it goes poorly. But he formulates a plan, and this is the point of the book that I thought, that sounds completely unreasonable and just crazy, and this is silly. But if you get past that, then it's amazing. They formulate this plan to bring Ames's ex-partner, who is a trans woman, into this relationship. Not in a sexual way, but to be the father/mother/parent that Ames feels he can't be. So they bring a trans woman into the relationship and they try and work out what their family unit will be. First of all, there's a whole bunch of time spent trying to convince a hetero woman that this is a great idea, when all the readers of the book are going, this is a fucking terrible idea. but it sounds unreasonable when you first get to there. But the character development in this book is such that you understand everyone so well by the end that you'd fall in love with these three people that are just trying to work out what it means to be a man or a woman or a trans woman and a family, and how do we do that. And it's a wonderfully rich and complex puzzle that they're trying to work out together. And there's a whole bunch of really weird stuff that happens in between, and some quite tragic stuff as well. But in the mix, that's the core, is they're just trying to figure out how this works. The woman that's carrying the baby, she doesn't want to carry a baby if the husband is going to leave her to become a trans woman again, because Ames really isn't sure what he wants to do. So there's this consideration of, do I terminate the pregnancy, or do I keep the baby? And then there's the relationship between Ames and the girlfriend about, do we continue doing this, or do I support you to be a trans woman if that's what you want? Can I support you as a man knowing that you used to be a trans woman? And then this third person who is unblinkingly, unflinchingly a trans woman, confident, you would think, outwardly. And then how does that play into this little mix? It's not a love triangle. It's not a sex romp. It is a really beautifully well considered discussion about what family means, what masculinity means, what motherhood, fatherhood, what all of that means, and how do we make sense of all that in the modern world. And I found it just so beautiful. I don't want to give too much away. There is some really great eye-opening and amazing scenes in this book. And I didn't even bring it here. I do have a physical book for this one, but that is Detransition Baby by Torrey. Please read this one. It's smashingly good, and I apologise for getting partway through and going, this is silly, I don't understand. You're right, I didn't. But then I kept going, and then I understand, and then I made, yeah, it was great. Read it. It's really good. Last on the list, again, I've just finished this one, and this is reading for the Booker, is Second Place by Rachel Cusk. So this is the first book in the Booker Prize. I'm going to try and get through. I'm not going to get through all of them. I just won't. But this is the first one, so I had it available to me. I had a spot in my audiobook listening, so I went for Second Place by Rachel Cusk. And you know, I read Outline by Rachel Cusk, and I just didn't see the point. Like, she obviously writes beautifully. She is an amazing writer. But I just didn't see in Outline, which is the first of a trilogy, and I haven't read the second or third because I just didn't see the point of what she was trying to tell me. And in fact, I can't remember much of Outline for that exact reason. Second Place is a little different. Her writing quality is evident. It's beautiful. And I'll direct you to another BookTuber's review of Second Place, because he does such a great job, and that's KD Books. Kieran from KD Books did a full review of this, and he talks about the history of the book and what it's based upon. So the author L, or the artist L that's in this book, is supposedly based on D.H. Lawrence, and one of the people that he used to communicate by letter with a lot is a fictional representation of the main character in this book. I won't go into all the detail. Go and watch Kieran's video because it's great. But it tells the story of a couple who live out in the countryside in peace and tranquility, so they believe. And on their property they have a second place, like a shack. Friends, family, and whoever wants to come and stay there for short or long periods. And they're used to this arrangement until an artist shows up on invitation by the main character. His name is Elle, and he brings along a woman called Brett. And they are what you would think in the pre-war kind of, in the 20s kind of era, you would think as footloose and fancy free. They're artists, they live a certain way, and they dislike regular society for its constriction, and so they're very, and so the way in which they act is all about art and parties and the consideration of the world and breaking of boundaries. Whereas the main character and her husband are very much bound together. We get a hint that the main character has had a life before being married to this big burly guy, big strong guy that's quite domineering and very masculine. We get a hint that she has had this previous life that she's not proud of, and it was a life of, similar to the artists, it was a life of freedom and choice and risk, and she gave all of that away for this man. And now, introduced back into this second place, the shack on their property, is a couple that have embraced this freedom, and she longs for that thing again. So it's kind of like Rachel Cusk in Outline. It subtly makes its point about the themes that it's trying to make a point about. In this, it's about masculinity and what it means to be a member of a partnership, and positive and negative masculinity and relationships. So it's these kinds of themes that Cusk is exploring, but it's not bashed over the head with a hammer kind of theme where you know it instantly. You could read this book as simply a telling of a story about strange people living in the house down the back, without ever exploring the history that Kieran goes into in his review, or exploring in great detail the complex themes of masculinity and relationships. You could just read it as a simple pre-war tale of a marriage being broken down by new arrivals. We've had plenty of books like that. But if you look into it deeply, it's quite rewarding, but it's not the kind of book that rams those themes and that down your throat. It's very, very subtle, which did lead me at some points throughout the book of thinking, well, what's the point of this? And I was left a bit empty in parts. In other parts, it was a great story, well told, and I got the point. In other parts, I thought, well, why do I need to know this? The whole thing is narrated by the main character to another character that we never know, seemingly by letter, called Jeffers. It's a friend of the main characters that we just don't know his or her history. We don't know why there's a communication going. We don't know how they know each other. It's seemingly a single conversation between the main character and Jeffers via letter, I'm guessing, or just third-party conversation. It's very strangely done, and I'm not sure of the point of that. Only to give the narrator, the main character, some sense of being not 100% reliable. So it is this unreliable narrator. It's her version of events, and her version of a marriage, and her version of what she sees as the artistic life that these other people are leading. It's very, very interesting. You could talk for hours about it, and I think if you go deeper, please go and watch Kieran's video about this book. It's very rewarding and goes into the history of how we got here. And that's it. That's all I'm reading right now. I've just finished things, like 2 things, just this morning. So I'm yet to pick something up. It may be from this little pile, because I have a short stack of books from the library that will need to go back at some stage. And I'm not sure where to start. This one is from the Booker Prize long list, so I may do this first so it ticks off another Booker Prize. This is Mary Lawson's A Town Called Solace. I know nothing about it. On audiobook I'll probably do the same. I'll find another BookTube prize and I'll on audiobook, and then I'll have 2 Booker Prize. I'll find a Booker Prize long lister on audiobook as well, and then I'll have 2 going at once. But Mary Lawson's A Town Called Solace, know nothing about it, but I think that's the next physical book I'm going to read. The other things from the library which I've got is Miyazuki Sujimura, Lonely Castle in the Mirror, billed as fantasy, no, not fantasy, as magic realism. And I am a bit of a fan of magic realism, especially the Japanese, a la Murakami. And this has had good reviews. It's prize-winning Japanese, in Japanese, and since been translated. It does sound like just a well-worn story type, though. It also says, in a tranquil neighbourhood of Tokyo, 7 teenagers wake to find their bedroom mirrors are shining. At a single touch, they are pulled from their lonely lives to a wondrous castle filled with winding stairways, watchful portraits and twinkling chandeliers. So rather than pulled through a wardrobe, they're pulled through a mirror, which has happened a million times before. So when I get to this, I'm hoping it does something different than every other pull through a cupboard, pull through a mirror kind of story. A lonely castle in the mirror. I have heard good things though. And this, I don't know too much about it. I did see a small, very brief review about it, and this is Leanne Leanne Simpson. I'm sorry for the middle name, I just can't do it. And this is Noopy Ming, The Cure for White Ladies. Again from the library, and after watching a previous review very briefly on YouTube, I thought I should, but it wasn't at the library, and when I requested it, they just bought it for me. That's a great thing. Remember, guys, if your library doesn't have a book that you want, you just request it, and then libraries go ahead and buy it and then put it through their system, and a couple of weeks later it just shows up on your reserve shelf. How nice is that? I haven't done that before. Anyway, Leanne Simpson's Noopy Ming. I don't know too much about it. I know, is it Brian from Bookish may have done a review or have read this. So I'm going to give that a crack as well. And written in very different style. So some in prose and some in verse, and just very strangely written. So even though it looks like that's not much there, even though it looks like a sizable book, there's some pretty sparse pages there. So it could be a nice experience to do in between other things. That's it, a Friday Reads, finally. And there was so much reading on Friday Reads. I hope you enjoyed that. A little bit long, but I had a lot to cover. And if I do, now that I'm back from holidays, I can do videos a little bit more often, and I don't have to cover like 8 books in one video. But enjoy your day, everyone, wherever you may be. And I'll see you again soon. Thanks, bye.